you'll get to know me pretty well tonight, I think, because I'm delighted to be talking about my favorite topic. It's something that I've been quite passionate about for several years. I first went to Guatemala in 2004 on the day of the tsunami in Southeast Asia. And of course, Tikal is remote enough that you don't really know what's going on anywhere else in the world except in that moment. And we didn't find out about the tsunami until the next day when we were back in civilization. But as soon as I walked into the Grand Plaza of Tikal National Park, something really changed for me. It was an immediate, profound, what's known as a peak experience. And I had this overall sense that I had truly come home. And I had been to the Maya lands up in the Yucatan of Mexico before, back in the 80s. But I didn't have that kind of an earth-shattering experience. So it's been kind of a quest ever since 2004 to learn more about that experience and about the culture and the environment and the history and the cosmology of the people that created that environment in Tikal. So a part of what you'll be hearing tonight is the results of a lot of research, a lot of experience there as well as here. I've been actively involved with the Mayan calendars for several years, and I'm hoping that I can shed some light on this whole concept that has become quite popularized in the West. And I would like to ask you, if possible, to hold your questions, or at least to take a note about the questions so that we can cover them at the end of the presentation, because there is a lot of material to get through. And I would anticipate probably that your question may be answered if you just hold off a little bit. If not, let me know. So what we're going to cover, in my perspective, are the greatest gifts that the Maya have brought the Western world at this point in time. We'll talk about 2012, the 2012 phenomena, and I'll give some insights in terms of what's going on with that. Then we'll take a look at what's going on in Guatemala, and I'll propose a question by the end of the program today, and you can kind of noodle that for the next, I think, 58 days till December 21st. And we'll talk more about the Mayan prophecies and what they really are as opposed to what our media has been telling us they are. And then we'll open it up for questions. So the way I always start one of these presentations is asking the audience, what day is it anyway? To most people in the Western world, it's a Thursday, which is kind of like the new Friday. And it's towards the end of fall, in election year. And, you know, daylight savings time is going away soon, but that's really about it. It's the end of a work week. Whereas to the Maya, and anyone following the Mayan sacred calendar, it's an entirely different experience to know what day it is and to work with the energies of the day. Today, on the Mayan sacred calendar, which is the heart and soul of all of the Mayan calendars, today is the energy of 12 Akabal. And Akabal is the name of the day lord that presides over today's energy. And it's archetypal energy, so it is the essence of the energy at dawn or twilight. And it's one of the luckiest one of the days. There are 20 day lords altogether on the Mayan sacred calendar. It's one of the luckiest. It's also, to me, one of the most sublime, if not the most sublime. Because you think of the energy at dawn and dusk, and the rays of the sun are getting long. It's the photographer's favorite time to shoot. It's the monk's favorite time to meditate. Because all is still. And there's a big difference between that energy and the more harsh, broad daylight that you have during the rest of the day. And this energy of the day lord, Akabal, is complemented by the energy of a number. And the numbers go up to number 13, 1 through 13. And this energy, number 12, of course, it's the second to the last number, which means it's the number of very great understanding. So when Paula and I were trying to figure out what day to do this, I'm looking at my Mayan calendar, and which is actually coordinated with the Gregorian calendar. And I thought, 12 understanding. I mean, this means that no matter who's there, no matter how I talk about this topic, people will be getting it at some level. So we've got this energy kind of at our backs all day long, 12 Akabal, which gives you that sublime feeling about the day, as well as just the knowing, the clairknowance, that whatever you hear tonight, whatever you expose yourself to during the day, it's going in at a pretty deep level into your psyche. So that's what's going on today. And I also have here an altar. This is a very typical kind of Mayan altar. And it is the cloth itself is hand woven by one of the clans. There are 22 different groups of Mayan peoples in Guatemala. And this was woven by the Tujujil people, which are they're living on Lake Atitlan, which is in the highland area of Guatemala. And you'll see the colored candles match the colors in their, we would call it in North America, we would call it a medicine wheel. But they think of it as the four directions, or actually they're not just directions, they're guardians that came from the star cluster of Pleiades to inform and help this version of humanity learn how to live and how to worship. So each one of these deities, if you will, or grandparents, comes from a certain cardinal direction. And what I'm going to do just briefly, I'm not going to go into a whole ceremony because those take about 2 or 3 hours. So what I'll do in English is light the candle for each one of these, and I'll speak just a couple of words about it. And with an invocation like this, what we're doing is we're asking them to be present with us and to guide my words, to guide your thoughts, to guide all of our whole experience this evening. So you may want to sit tall, close your eyes for a minute, ground a little bit, feeling your feet, connect to the earth. Feel your spine become filled with breath. And feel your heart and the crown of your head lift towards the heavens. And we'll be starting in the east, where the color is red. It is the energy of fire. And it is also symbolizing spiritual maturity and blood. And then from the east, you call to the west, where the color is black, sometimes depicted as blue or purple. And this is the symbol of the earth and of grounding and of death, which to the Maya is just the beginning of another cycle. And then we'll call in the energy. See, we're going east-west. We'll go north-south. So in the north, we have the color white. We have Ikib Alam, and Ikib Alam is the color of our teeth, our bones, and the whites of our eyes from which we connect to one another. And the winds blow from the north to the south. And in the south, the element is not air, but water. And it is yellow, which is the color of the seed. It's the color of maternity. It's the color of new life. So we ask, Balam Kitse, Balam Akab, Iki Balam, Imahu Kutach, to be with us today. En español es el corazón del cielo, el corazón de la tierra, la corazón de agua y corazón de aire, viento, aire. Está bien, gracias. You'll note also the gentleman on the other side of the screen. His name is Don Juan. He is in a traditional garb from another group of Maya, the Cachiquels, that live on the other side of this lake where this came from. And he is setting up for a traditional Mayan fire ceremony. He has a little bag of sugar in his hand, and he's created the wheel with the 4 parts to it. That is the very first thing that a Mayan aji, which is also known as in our language as a shaman, or a Mayan daykeeper, that is the very first thing that goes into the fire pit. And again, whenever the Maya are doing ritual, these are the elements, these are the grandparents that they invoke first. And then from there, he's got a number of other materials. He's got incense and candles and wood and all kinds of other things that go into the fire as offerings towards these grandparents, los abuelos, as well as they go through the full count of the Mayan sacred calendar. So, for example, 12 Acabal is just one of 260 days of the full count of the Mayan sacred calendar. And that's why the ceremony may take 2 or 3 hours, because you're invoking all of those energies, all 260 of them, to make the full count. And it's very ardent prayer. It's very eloquent. The Maya believe that because our version of humanity has the gift of speech, the more eloquent you are as you address and petition the deities, the more likely it is that your words and prayers will be heard and answered. So it's a very elaborate and ornate and fantastic affair. And I was so attracted to this, I think. I had been a yogi for many, many years, since the 70s. And I'd never really been to a Vedic fire ceremony. And that's because, in my perspective anyway, you have to do a lot of work yogically in order to earn the right to a seat at a Mayan fire ceremony. Whereas in this tradition, they lead with a fire ceremony. So that's one of the first things you'll do when you're working with the Mayan elders, is participate in a ceremony and then learn little by little how to become one of the participants of the ceremony. Another one of the greatest gifts in my purview is Mayan time. And it's something you really have to get to know how to work with. It's taken me years, and I can still find myself getting frustrated sometimes because our ideas of clock time restrict us in ways that Mayan time just would never do. It's just not inherent. Because Mayan time is similar to what Einstein would talk about, the theory of relativity and the quantum world. And when you go to Guatemala, you can feel the time and the consciousness change before you even land in the airport. I believe that's because there are millions of living Maya in Guatemala. It's the country that has the largest percentage of indigenous population in the Americas, like 60%, which is unheard of anywhere in the Americas. Bolivia is the next, the country with the next largest population of indigenous peoples. So you've got millions of people on Mayan time, which is really not 3D. It's the fourth dimension, where space and time conjoin. And they create that donut manifold of energies, that vortex of energies that puts you just in a different consciousness just by being there. And you hear often, you know, the veil is very thin when you go to Guatemala. The veil between dimensions is very thin. And it's very easy to feel that. Even for people that have been there the very first time, they know. But they may not be able to explain it this way. And that's one of the reasons I think this is so important to talk about. And then, of course, the Mayan calendars, which, as we're learning, they're really cycles of time as opposed to kind of calendars with little blocks and spaces that you put up on the wall. We know from the elders that there are 20 different calendars. And 20 is a big, important number in the Mayan system. It shows up everywhere. And yet in the Western world, up until recently, we've only known and understood, to a degree, 3 different calendars. The sacred calendar, which we just talked about, which is the one depicted here on the left with the 13 numbers and the 20 day lords, and these are depicted as glyphs. And you see the numbers, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 dots, and then a line is a 5, then a line and a dot is a 6, 7, etc. They only have 3 different symbols for all the numbers, whereas we have 9, right? They only have 3. And it was a system that they used, you know, you think in earlier days when they weren't writing yet, they would use their fingers and put like sketches in the dirt. 1, 2, 3, 4, back of the hand is 5, 6, 7, etc. So all these stela, we're going to be looking at some of them later on, that the archaeologists have found, have just this simplistic numbering system of dots, lines, and the third symbol looks like a little egg, and that is the symbol for 0. And the Maya were the first, and for many, many years, the only civilization to ever conceive of 0. The other civilizations on the other side of the world didn't have that when the Mayans were working with it. And then over here on the other side is the Mayan calendar for used primarily for agricultural purposes. It's a 365-day calendar, and it interlinks, as you can see, with the sacred calendar. And then, lo and behold, we have 17 other cycles. So it's just this vast amount of timing, and we don't even know what those other 17 calendars or cycles are yet. Now the Maya might, and they do, but we as Westerners don't have access to that yet. So all of this is part of the system that the Maya use to, that the Maya use to navigate their life. And it's known as La Cruz Maya, the Mayan cross. And this is the website that I built in 2011 because I had been working with this. I received my Mayan cross from an elder named Don Alejandro, who's very well known in the world, not just in Guatemala. And he knew immediately, just by looking at my cross, so much about me. I couldn't believe how much he could tell me about myself. And he didn't know me that well at all, but just by looking at my cross. So I became very, very interested in this, did a lot of investigation of it, and then built this website to automate the calculation process, because it used to take me about 30 to 45 minutes to build one of these crosses, just doing it manually. So what this is, it's a depiction of you as a person. The energy, this is today's energy, dawn 12. And if you were born today, you would be born as a 12 Akabal. That's the energy that you have in your heart, and you carry it. It's predominant energy for you through your whole life. Now, if you picture this as a cross, head, heart, feet, left arm, right arm, so the cross is the person facing you as you look on this screen. The energy up here, for bird, is the energy that was present when you were conceived. It's your karmic load. It has a lot of influence on what kind of karma you brought in to this lifetime. And then the energy that's down at the feet is the monkey energy for this particular glyph, for this particular sign. And then your gifts, I can do this with my cursor, your gifts. See what happens when you move your cursor? You get like a quick version, explanation of what this energy is. This happens to be 6 knowledge energy. And then, so these are the, let's see, these are the gifts and these are the challenges. Now remember, it's left, right, so it's because the image is the person facing out. You can look at all this information and really get a feel for what the energies are. Then what you do is you meditate on them. And when you just sit with them and see what the spirit guides, because each one of these is a spirit guide for you. Each one of these may have messages for you. And that's the purpose, the individual purpose, and why you can use it as a life navigational tool. That's how the Maya use it. They've used it for eons. And now we have more and more people in our country and around the world using it as well. So it's not really astrology, because astrology is like the celestial positioning of things, right? These are archetypal energies. It works on a different principle. But it kind of serves a similar purpose. Then, of course, the long count calendar is what all the 2012 business is about. So this is the third calendar that the Westerners have become pretty familiar with, or becoming more and more familiar with. This picture is of the first stela. That's like a big hunk of rock that has carvings all over it, that was found in Mexico in 1926, the same year that this building was put up. And it was a massive find, because they determined, once they cracked the Mayan code, which was much, much later, but they figured out that they were measuring deep time, 13.7 billion years, with this particular stela. And it's broken into cycles, a lot of different cycles, starting with the keen, which is the day, and then going up to a tune, which is 360, and multiples of 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, all the way through to deep time. So this is the calendar that has the cycle that everybody's talking about. It is a cycle of 5,126 years, began August 13th, 3114 BC, and ends December 21st, 2012. So the big question is, what were the Maya timing? And that's what everybody's been talking about, guessing about, whether or not some asteroid's going to, clobber the Earth, whether or not like Planet X is going to happen, the axis is going to shift, all those doomsday scenario type things were really popular in like 2009 and 2010, and they kind of faded away, which is kind of nice, you know, that people got beyond that and realized that this might be something else. It's interesting, though, because we don't really know exactly if there was an event on 8/13/31/14. The astronomers say no, there wasn't a big celestial event. The geologists haven't found anything that like was a big deal. We do know, if you watched any of the video before we started the program tonight, we do know, and historically we know, that in the 3000 BC period, there were major civilizations sprouting up and developing and evolving in Egypt and in Samaria and in the Indus Valley and in China. The dynastic system was being set up too. So they were on to something with this date. We just don't know specifically what. So in 1987, this gentleman, Jose Arguelles, the late Jose Arguelles, introduced the Western world to this concept of the calendar ending on 2012. And he was an art historian. He went to University of Chicago. He taught at Princeton. And then he started traveling and started getting just all this kind of fantastic download spiritual information and put together the harmonic convergence, which was in August, I think, of 1987. And since then, hundreds of other people have piled on, if you will, exploiting this information for one reason or another. One of my favorites is Ian Lunghold, the late Ian Lunghold, who did a fantastic job explaining to lay people a very fantastic theory about the purpose of this long count calendar and what the Maya were timing. And he collaborated with Carl Kalaman, and Carl Kalaman wrote a few books about how the 9-level pyramids are a replica of what the scientists know about the evolution of consciousness. So that was the key takeaway from that particular body of work. And they also introduced a lot of other very interesting concepts, such as when we feel like time is speeding up, it's not time that's speeding up, it's creation that's speeding up. And so here now we have the information age and we feel like, you know, the days are shorter, the nights are shorter, we just don't have enough time to do everything. But in actuality, they would argue that it's not the clock, it's creation itself. We just have more and more possibilities and information presented to us all the time. And I'm not going to go through any of these others. I'll give them honorable mention. You probably know who some of them are already. Greg Braden, who's done a lot of work with 2012. John Mayer Jenkins has done a tremendous amount of independent research. He's an archaeoastronomer. So he was on the ground in Guatemala and Mexico, looking at the physical structures, aligning them with astrological information, to come up with his theories. And then Barbara Marx Hubbard, who was, I think she kind of debuted, at least in my world, with the movie What the Bleep years ago, and started pushing in the envelope of our thinking with quantum physics and consciousness. So, 2012 in Guatemala, nobody knew what it was a couple years ago. They weren't talking about it. It was, the long count calendar was something that it wasn't hidden to them. They were just very focused on their sacred calendar. And we recently had a gentleman named Pedro Cruz, Tata Pedro Cruz, came to the Midwest and from Guatemala. And he told the group, he said, I didn't know anything about it until I came in the United States. And yet now you see this video that I showed earlier that was done by the government of Guatemala, and it tells the whole story of the long count calendar and how we're coming up now on the 13 Baktun and the changing to a new era, La Nueva Era. So everybody's talking about it. All eyes are on this. And you have to be really kind of asleep if you haven't heard of 2012, anywhere in the world by now. So I say it's not for sissies because I don't know about you, but this has been a really interesting year. And not necessarily in laid back, happy, joyful type of year. It's been one, in my purview, that is forcing the dark side to bubble into consciousness and be healed on a lot of different levels, whether it's global, individual, familial, whatever. And anyone that has had issues, most of us, they have been exacerbated this year. Can't turn your back on them this year. You can try, but they're really front and center this year. So there is a whole lot of healing going on. And as we know, healing is healing. I mean, it's a process. But it's also moving us to a more integrous level of consciousness. It's moving us towards pure hearts and pure bodies and pure minds, and pushing transparency and accountability, and really causing us to rethink how we say things. And the scientists are a perfect example. I mean, they used to come out with superlatives all the time. And now, I mean, even though whenever they make a new find, like an archaeological find, for example, they will use the words, it could possibly be the biggest, largest, most sophisticated. And there's a sense of humility there. There's a sense of, wow, of awe and wonder that, in the earlier days, you didn't find that. It was more ego-driven, some of these finds. And now it's more like, wow, folks, just this news last week about finding our twin planet up in the Oros Sorturius, or does anybody know how to say that? And this idea of finding the 5,000-year-old flying machine in a cave in Afghanistan. That was on the George Noory Coast to Coast late night show. But there's just, again, there's so many possibilities. Creation is speeding up. So given all this, it's really nice to have tools to stay grounded, to stay centered, so that you don't go into overwhelm, so you don't become stressed and not know what to do because you're so confused. And isn't it ironic that where we go for this kind of wisdom typically is, 3, 4, 5,000 years back in time? Just an observation. So what do the elders say about 2012? And what the elders say is all based upon their sacred book, their sacred creation story that's known as the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh, by the way, is ill-housed in the Newberry Library in downtown Chicago. That's a whole other story. We can talk about it offline if you like. But, and you'll notice that there are several 5,200-year cycles, according to the Popol Vuh. And they're known, each cycle is known as a sun. And the first sun, Balam Kitse, right? Second sun, Balam Akab. So it's all integrated in with the four grandparents, right? 4 directions. So the first one were the Hyperboreans, the second one was Lemurians, third were the Atlanteans. We're in the 4th sun, Ikibalam, this one. And we're moving towards the 5th sun. And each one of these is ruled by a type of energy. It kind of goes back and forth, feminine, masculine, feminine, masculine. Now we're going into a more balanced masculine, feminine energy. And we're not going to be working with, well, we'll still be working with, but we're going to be more influenced by the element of ether. So our consciousness will have a more etheric quality to it. And then 5,200 years later, we'll go to the 6th sun, where that masculine, feminine will be harmonized and we'll be working with an element that we don't even know what it is yet. So this is what Carlos Barrios, who was here a year and a half ago in Chicago, we hosted him. He is the author of The Book of Destiny, which is a very important book to read and to carry like as a reference for understanding the calendars, understanding Nacht, the space-time, understanding the day signs and the Mayan cross and everything that we've talked about so far. And he was an anthropologist that worked with a lot of different elders from different clans in Guatemala and put the composite of this wisdom into the Book of Destiny. So this is the cycle. And I always like to emphasize with people that this 2012 phenom, as they call it, is not an event. This is a process. And you think of how the Western astrologers talk about the age of Aquarius, you know. There's not like one, you don't pinpoint one date and say, it's here. And I always think of the tides in the ocean and how the water gradually, you know, keeps coming up, wave after wave. And it may get to a point where the water is so tumultuous that you don't want to be in it, but it will get to a point of high tide, and then we measure it, you know, and we put it in a table. But then, you know, it's a process, wave after wave. And this calendric system, in my view, allows you access. It's like giving you the combination that unlocks the sensibility of these rhythms. And these rhythms of time, these rhythms of the elements, these rhythms of all these other archetypal sorts of energies. And it makes for a very magical, they call it magical realism, I guess is the literary term, way of viewing the world. And then lastly, in terms of the gifts that the Maya have offered, their healing system is really cool because the calendar itself is in your body. It's embodied. How could it not be? And remember I talked about how the numbers 13 and 20 are so important? Well, they come from the fact, sacred geometry, 20 digits, right? 10 fingers and 10 toes. 13 joints in the body. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then 7 chakras. So you've got 13 times 20, which is 260, which is the same as the Mayan sacred calendar, which is the same as a gestation cycle for humans, which is the same as a gestation cycle for corn at that tropical latitude. These aren't coincidences, right? I mean, this is all pretty divine. So what happens is when a healer, an aji, it's known as in the Mayan language, is going to do a healing, they'll, of course, want to know what your day sign is. And the day sign goes here, left ankle. And then they do the count of 20 through all the day signs, through the whole body, in that order that I just went through. And then they'll look. Wherever the numbers 3, 6, and 11, there's only 3, they will be your weak points. And we've done workshops on Mayan healing techniques, and it's uncanny. Everybody maps their own body with the Mayan calendar. And they look and they go, of course I have shoulder problems. Or yeah, it's my bad ankle. It's just amazing. And of course, this is also very yogic, because the whole idea in Tai Chi and all the ancient arts, it was the joints where the energy gets stuck, right? And that's why you use the healing arts to move the energy, the Chi. So it's pretty amazing what they have gifted us. And I'm sure we're on the tip of the iceberg with all of this sort of thing. Meanwhile, back in the mainstream, they're looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for some way to demean. And I won't go further than that. But in my perspective, the Maya are on the precipice of establishing a level of credibility that they haven't known for thousands of years. And it just makes my heart beat so strong to know that. And I encourage anyone who's doing Mayan teachings or using 2012 to help, fuel their business or their audiences or whatever, to be sure to be in integrity here and give credit where it's due. Because a lot of times the 2012 just becomes this Western concept, and the whole idea originated with these people that have so many gifts to offer the world. So let's take a quick look at how conventional science has weighed in on 2012. They were pretty mute on that point for many years, until 2009. I think that Doomsday movie that came out fueled a lot of people to want to write about it and speak more about it. So now there are several books. These are all PhD experts in their fields: archaeology, anthropology, and art history. And with every single one of them, they've done their research and they say, this end of the world thing, it's not the end of even a calendar, it's the end of a cycle, but it's cyclic, right? So there's no stopping point here. And it's the millenarian mother lode rests with the Westerners, not with the Maya at all. And yet, how would you have known that the scientists would have made 3 major announcements with discoveries in Guatemala, all of them in Guatemala? This one came out May 11th. The press release was, this new discovery proves that the end of the world will not happen on the 21st. And it was a fantastic discovery. I mean, they've got this huge room that was found through a looter's tunnel. And they go into this cave, and 2 big walls are filled with this beautiful cinnabar paint and black paint, depicting a king at court with all the courtesans as well. And then on the other wall, this wall, it was kind of like this white background. These are all the numbers. See the dots and the lines? This is like a mathematical whiteboard, ancient. Going back, I don't remember how old, maybe 600, 700, 800, classic period of the Maya. So this was a major find, but it was also an interesting timing of the announcement. Second major find was La Corona. They announced that the second reference to December 21st that had ever been etched in stone was found. And again, the person who interpreted this, David Stewart, who was a young man, he was like 17 years old when he cracked the Mayan code as an epigrapher. He said that when you put 2012 in this context with all these other dates and all this other information, it was really used just to emphasize the eternal nature of their king. And that the reign of this king was not going to end until the end of this Baktun cycle. So you have to look at it contextually. And then just a couple weeks ago, another find of Lady Cabal, a queen. They found her tomb laid out with all these beautiful ornaments and stuff inside, including these alabaster effigies found. So there have been some major announcements coming from the scientists this year. The science is there, at least from a historical perspective, that the Maya changed behaviors with each change in Baktun. Because they lived from we think 1500, 2000, maybe earlier, BC, until about, that's the great civilization supposedly filtered away around this date in here, around in here. So what we see, though, is that they grew in sophistication to a city-state type of organization all over. There were lots and lots of people here, not just a few. And the Age of Kings began in one Baktun, and it ended in the next. And these civilizations that had 16 to 20 different kings or monarchs all of a sudden didn't have any. And then another version of the Maya came along, the Itzas, which is like a clan. And in Chichen Itza, they built this massive and beautiful city. And by 1618, 40,000 people had just left that city. Change of behavior. And then this is a fun story. This one in the 12th Baktun, which is the one just before this one. There was a stronghold of Petén Itza people in Guatemala. They lived on an island near in a lake near Tikal. And the conquistadores came down from Mexico, and they said, they were going to take them over, right? They were going to finish off the conquest once and for all. And the royalty of the Petén Itza came out and said, no, you've got it all wrong. Come back in 2 years, and we'll go peacefully. Because that will be the end on our calendar of this era, and we'll be ready to go to the next, and we'll go peacefully. So the question is now, what is the change in behavior going to be in this Baktun? And that's what the 2012ologists have been talking about for 15, 20 years now. But the texts are clear that there is change in behavior with each one of these new Baktuns. Okay, let's go down to Guatemala. Let's find out what's going on down there. This is one of my favorite places. It's a market. It's the most medieval market I'd ever been in my life. It's an animal market every Friday. And things are alive and well. They've got, they're selling everything but the kitchen. Well, they are selling kitchen sinks at this market. So, at the beginning of 2012, I'm starting to get emails and comments like, hey, the world didn't blow up. What happened? And I'm like, nobody ever said it was going to be January 1st, 2012. Nobody's ever said that. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a long year of, fighting off that kind of diatribe. And then I caught a piece of news by the end of January that a military dictator who should have gone to jail long time ago during the Guatemalan Civil War that lasted 3 generations, 30 years, they nailed him. They indicted him. And I was shocked because in Guatemala, impunity rules. Fast forward a couple more months, and the now president used to work for this guy, used to be in charge of intelligence. And his name is Rios Montt. And so the now president, they were doing some protesting up in the highlands of Guatemala. The Maya were protesting. And the military dictator says, state of siege. So they're using the military to deal with peaceful protests. A little bit of overkill there. By the end of May, remember what was happening at the end of May? It seems like years ago. The G8 conference, the alignment of the planets, the Venus transit, all that was going on around here. I'm driving down the road, listening to NPR. I hear Ira Glass on the American Life program, This American Life, starting to talk in depth, in graphic detail. They even issued like warnings about this material is sensitive, about the genocide that happened in Guatemala at this location, Dos Eres. And they had found some eyewitnesses that had survived, and they had come forward to talk about it. And this is stuff, this happened in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. The peace accords weren't until 1996. And it's just now, in 2012, coming to the surface. And I'm just like, wow. And this program, it's still online. It's still online. You can go to Finding Oscar, just Google Finding Oscar, and you can listen to the program. It's really strong journalism. And I couldn't believe that I'm in America listening to these truths come forward. Then, a month later, I get wind of a new documentary film called Granito, How to Nail a Dictator. And this film, it's still being screened all over the world to sold-out audiences. And it is footage, actual footage, that incriminates Rios Montt. Now, he's indicted, he's on house arrest, he's in Guatemala. The United States wants to bring him back here to try him for war crimes here as well. But I'm just, I'm still kind of incredulous about this whole thing. Then in early June, a book was released called The Fish That Ate the Whale. And it's a biography of the CEO of United Fruit Company. And that story of United Fruit in the banana republics and the hand that the United States government, CIA, and big corporations had in oppressing the people in all those countries, including, especially Guatemala, it's unconscionable. But, how wild is it that all this would come forward in 2012? And, I've been called a truth sleuth by some friends of mine. So I've been watching this stuff for years, but I have not seen this kind of information come forward so robustly until this year. I come back from Guatemala just before this volcano blows. And this was the biggest explosion they've had of this volcano. It's very close to 2 large cities in Guatemala. The same day this volcano blows and people are being evacuated, the mayor of Antigua, which is the old capital, is arrested on corruption and I think it's, embezzlement charges. And then they had Independence Day, so parades and hoopla and everything, all on the same weekend. So it's really just incredible how all this is happening just now. Just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, we get news that a peaceful protest in Quiché, which is the heart of the Maya land in Guatemala, they're protesting electrical rate hikes and school system issues. And again, the military shows up, not the police, the military, and kills 8 people and wounds 37. One of the interior minister of Guatemala is quoted as saying, "That's no big deal. We have violence all the time in Guatemala. Killing 8 people is not that big of a deal." The United Nations, the United States, and all the other developed countries are up in arms. They're watching what's going on down there. And they're saying, you're supposed to have a democracy. This was a democratically elected leader, supposedly. And you've got to learn how to work with peaceful protesters. You know, you need to train your policemen and women to work because people have the right to express themselves. So a few days after that, they marched on the Capitol, and they're asking for or demanding succession and putting an end to the genocide. And I won't go into the details of what happened in the Guatemalan Civil War, but you don't really, people in our country don't really think about these things very much until you're there and you start to see, you know, what happens, or what can happen in those circumstances. So it's pretty intense. I forgot to update the slide because 2 days ago they were having another gathering, and they were in Quiché, and they were saying that, or they were Quiché people, and they were saying, we want justice. We want to make sure that the people that were killed and those that were wounded and the perpetrators of all that go to trial. So here's my question for you to noodle on. Do you think the Maya, consciously or unconsciously, are using the energies of change so apparent in 2012 to improve their lives? They know the world is watching. We have the technology. They've all got cell phones. They're all on Facebook. The Maya are on Facebook. And it wasn't until the early part of October that that hit me. And I've asked a couple of elders about that, and they were hit the same way. It was just like, why not? So that's a question, that's something, this prophetic period of the 9 hells, that was prophesied, they're over, and now it's time. It's time for a new era. And these are people, there I think are 7 or 8 million living Maya that have been oppressed like you wouldn't believe. And it's time. So on December 21st, there's all kinds of things going on. The video that we showed at the beginning of the program is an invitation for everybody to come to Guatemala and see how beautiful the country is and the people and learn about the customs and the culture. I've been going to Unification Maya, which is in an area near Tikal in Petén, Guatemala, where we do 7 ceremonies, 7 days in a row, leading up to the 21st, which is the winter solstice. And people come from all over the world, and you're just immersed in that consciousness. And they have, I don't know, probably 16 different elders at least that come from all parts of the Maya lands to teach you their meditations and things like that. And then in Quiché, which is where all this other stuff is happening, this is a picture of the Mayan New Year's celebration of the sacred calendar. They have New Year's a lot, right? Because they've got 3 different calendars. But they love the fire. Fire is the only element that is transformative. Cannot, it's got the most transformative power. And this is up in the mountains, and they're doing their ceremonies. They're petitioning for their clients, and as well as for the world. And it's my vision and a lot of other people's vision that on December 21st, the meditation will be to link all these transformative fires together as one. One people, one fire, one planet. So here are some of the prophecies. We touched on one of them, that we came from the stars. And they also believe in the eternal soul. So reincarnation is a part of their cosmology. And the way they say it is, we are the ones of yesterday, we are the ones of today, and we are the ones of tomorrow. And when this life is done, we go back to the stars. Another very famous prophecy is, we are one like the fingers of one hand. And the 4 colors also happen to be the 4 colors of corn. And we, as this version of humanity, is made from corn. And they are also the colors of each one of the races on the earth. And a prophecy that just like we have, quote, Indian corn that has all the different colors in one cob, when we get to the point on this planet where we're that integrated with each other, then we'll move. That will be the tipping point to move to the next era. The other is every day is a gift. That's the purpose of the Mayan sacred calendar, is to worship every day from the morning to the night. And that no one in this process, not an event, in this process, no one will be left behind. And also to live as close as you can to the earth. If you live close to the earth, you have less to worry about, much less to worry about. And to heal her as if she is your own, because she is. Rigoberta Menchú is the first woman, maybe the only, I'm not sure, to win the Nobel Peace Prize for peace in 1992 for her involvement in the peace accords for the closure of the Mayan Civil War. And her words, when the hand of destiny touches you, you have no choice but to act, remind me of a spiritual teaching I heard a few years ago, that if you're on any kind of a spiritual path, you will get to the point where all that you can do, all that you are motivated to do, is to serve. So in that light, it feels a lot like what she is saying. You must act because you know your destiny. And you know your destiny because you're on that path. So, bienvenidos a la nueva era. This is a shot that I took leaving the Guatemala City airport. They're ready. And yet there are activities everywhere. There will be big meditations, concordances going on. We'll be linked in to one of those because one of the big projects that I've been involved in is the Shift of the Ages film project, which is the biography of a Mayan elder, and with the backdrop, of course, of Mayan history. So we'll be doing a meditative concordance along with the opening of the film as well. So there's a lot there. It's 8:15, so I'm over time, well, a little bit over time. I know there may be questions, and I welcome those, but I also have a possibility of something special. A friend of mine in Guatemala, who's on the Mayan path, just recently became aware of the Theosophists, and especially resonates with Madame Blavatsky. And I was online the other night, and she's IMing me. She's like, what do you know about? How can I get a biography? I mean, I need to know about this person. And I suggested to her that after this talk, there may be some people in this audience that might be able to shed some light on Madame Blavatsky for her. And I was in the library, and Pablo told me of the name of a book. She speaks English, but there is a book in Spanish that she can read online that's a biography. So I gave her that information. But if anybody is willing to stay for a few minutes, I will bring her up on Skype, and we can have like a picture-to-picture conversation with her, and she may have an opportunity to learn something more from a real theosophist. So that's a possibility too. Questions?
Well,
Anybody?
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you.
And,
thank you for having me. Thank you for indulging me.
I'm sure there must be some questions. I see that there's a question back here. Oh, a question from online. This may be too in-depth, but what is the 9 hells?
I'm not exactly sure. 9 is a big number for the Maya. It's the 9 levels of the underworld. Every day when the sun comes up, it travels all the way across, at that latitude, about 12 hours. And then at the end of the day, it goes into the west and sinks into the underworld. And the underworld is the darkness, and the 9 hells are representative of those 9 levels that you find in the underworld. I'm sure it's a Popol Vuh reference, and I'm probably not the best person to go into much more detail than that. But if you read the Popol Vuh, or read some interpretations of the Popol Vuh, it gets pretty grueling in there. And it's kind of the archetypal story of, meeting your own ego face to face and working through what needs to be worked through for liberation. Is there any feedback? Or?
Another question.
Okay.
Where can I read more about the significance of the numbers 13 and 9?
If you go to mayancross.com, there's a definition of the essences of those numerals, 1 through 13. There are a lot of different interpretations of those. Carlos Barrios's book, The Book of Destiny, has information about the numbers. I don't think it'll be that hard to find. If you Google it, it's probably the easiest place to start, and then go based on the works that come up through Google, you could go to the library probably and find even more. I don't think the scientists spend that much time interpreting them, but the Aki do, the shamans do. So if you wanted more like real-time information, you could go to Carlos Barrios's Facebook page. But I would probably read up on them first. Just go to Mayan Cross, go to Book of Destiny. And also meditate with them yourself, because that's that's one of the clearest ways to get the purest information, is to just sit with it. And then engage, in conversation with an elder, perhaps.
Any questions from people present? Yes?
Thank you. You're talking about the Guatemalan Mayans.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see them as the core of the Mayan tribe as opposed to the Yucatans or the Olmecs or the Aztecs? I mean, how do you differentiate what you're talking about, I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay. There's a couple of different ways. One is looking at it from a timeline perspective. The Olmecs were the earliest, according to the science that we have. And they were down in, partially in Guatemala, partially, or most though, in I don't even think it's the Yucatan. I think it might be Campeche. It's Villahermosa is where the big Olmec heads are. And that was more like 3000 BC. And then they transitioned into the Maya in that part of the world. The Mesoamerica north of there, in Oaxaca, with the Toltecs and the Mixtecs and the Zapotecs and the Aztecs, those were actually, well, the Aztecs were clearly later in time, and more like post-Mayan, post-classic Mayan. So there's kind of a time frame that is one way to understand, and yet that time frame it's shifting around based on new discoveries. For example, in El Mirador, which is a big site in northern Guatemala, Mayan site, there are so many things that are being found there that are obviously Olmec. So, we're really still kind of painting the picture. I mean, if you go to any of the, typical texts, they'll have it all mapped out on a timeline. But, the more we work with it, the grayer it becomes. What was the other part of your question?
Do you see Guatemala?
Oh, in Mexico, yeah.
Group of Maya today?
This is just my feeling. It feels to me like the Mexican culture government has had such a major influence that the Maya are, I don't think they're as numerous, but if they are even, they aren't wearing traditional garb unless they're like in a restaurant that's owned by a Mexican chain or family. So it's become more commercialized. I mean, when you go to the sites, it's a lot more commercialized of an experience than what you'll find in Guatemala. And I think a lot of that is because 30 years of civil war, you don't progress very quickly, right? So, the poverty level in Guatemala, which is one of the worst in the world, keeps it purer, ironically. When you go to the highlands in Guatemala, just like that one photo I showed of the animal market, everybody's decked out. And it reminds me of India. I mean, that's one of the reasons I fell in love with it, I think. Because you're driving around different villages, different areas in the highlands, and based on where you are, they're going to wear a certain style of clothes. They've got a different language. They have different cuisine. They have, a lot of major differences. But they're all Maya. Well, at least I never really saw much of that ever in that part of Mexico, in the Yucatan. Oaxaca's got, some villages that are still kind of close to, more indigenous customs. But to me, it just feels different. I was in the Yucatan in the 80s. And there you could still climb into the tombs, climb up the temples, and there weren't a lot of vendors around, trying to sell you stuff while you're trying to have a spiritual experience, right? But so in Guatemala, it's a lot different, at least from my perspective. And then we have beautiful sites in Honduras, and they also have some beautiful ones in Belize. And the Mayan culture in El Salvador is very rich also. So it's I don't want to place too much value judgment on it because they're all different, and they're all under very different circumstances. Mm-hmm. Did that help?
A bit.
Well, any remaining or?
I have another question that's just personal curiosity.
I've
read a lot about the Mayans. Mm-hmm. And they always talk about how warlike they are and all the horrible games and all the wars. And somehow it just doesn't feel right. Certainly at their high culture, they were not as vicious or warlike as what the books make, or were they? Maybe I'm...
Well, I think a lot gets confused. The Aztecs, which are the most recent of all of these cultures, have the most violent history that we know of. Not only with their wars and their aggression, but in terms of sacrifice, human sacrifice. And they've got a lot more evidence for all of that up in Teotihuacan, up in near Mexico City. The Maya in other parts, they did have wars. They didn't have kingdoms, they had city-states. And they were still, as they evolved, they were protecting their resources. And, when you get to the question of why did 40,000 people walk away from Chichen Itza? They talk about the Mayan collapse. Actually, they're not using that term collapse anymore, disappearance. But this is one of the reasons why I feel that the Maya are on the brink of so much credibility, because they are living people whose ancestors somehow survived drought, the obliteration of natural resources, deforestation, and all of those environmental factors played a big part in the, quote, disappearance of the Maya. They had to move. They had to go somewhere else because they'd tapped out the resources. So, and you will fight. It's like we talk here about the water wars, right? The oil wars. I mean, the depletion of resources is directly related to the level of aggression of a culture, I would submit. So I'm not sure they're any different or any more warlike than anything that we see today. I would probably argue that they didn't have that level of aggression. They didn't have as many people, even though they had millions of people. Mm-hmm. Did that help? Good.
We have a question over here.
Do you live in the United States, or do you live in Guatemala? And, is there something besides your website, or is there a book that you've written on all this experience?
Oh, that's the big question. Do you write a book? I live in Glen Ellen. I've lived in my house here 18 and a half years. I've been dividing my time between Central America and here since 2000. And now at the beginning of 2012, I launched this program for yoga because I'm a yoga teacher. And I've been working with underprivileged people in the pueblos in Guatemala. So now they've really got me hooked in, right? So I'll be going down there, as often as I can to teach. So living in that world and then coming back to this world, it can get tough, to see our level of materialism, to see, how we live and what we take for granted compared to what people in a poverty-stricken country like that have. But it's just amazing how many people in Guatemala, like Westerners, are there for service work because there is so much need. In terms of the book, I haven't gotten to it yet. After I wrote my thesis in 2008, I really tried to whittle that one into a book, and it just wasn't working. So the website took years. There's a lot of content there, and it changes so rapidly, and it supports the other activities that I'm doing that, it's all I can do to keep up with that. So I don't have a book, not yet. Someday.
We have a couple more questions.
Yes, I was wondering if you've learned anything significant on the notions of space and time from the Mayans' perspective.
Yeah, it just happened. Because I'd heard about this and considered it from an intellectual perspective for a while. And then, just a little story. When Tata Pedro was here, I have a fire circle in my backyard. And when he was here, the first thing he did was he walked up the driveway, went around the back, and went around the circle 3 times. They always go counterclockwise. And then he carries candles, not big ones, birthday candles in his pocket. Did a little fire ceremony on the spot. Johnny Reddy on the spot fire ceremony. He's great. And here's some pictures of him. And so a couple days later, he says, in Espanol, he's getting used to my Spanish by this time, I'm getting used to his, and he asked me, what is the name of this place? Lugar, place. And he points to the fire circle. And I'm like, I don't have a name. And he said, and then I thought, well, is he looking for the name of the town, my village, or my street, or my address? Or, he said lugar. That means place. And so I was a little confused. And then he says, well, es tres canil. Number 3, canil is the Mayan word for the day sign of seed or star seed. And I knew that that was the energy of the day that we were having this conversation. And for a split second, I went, wait a minute, that's time, not place. And then I got it. Time, place are the same for them. Al mismo. And just being in his presence for, I guess he was here a week. And he lived at my house. We went around doing ceremonies. His wife was with us. She's a friend of mine from here. And just being in his presence, we were in space-time the whole time. He functions beautifully, doing stuff in our culture. But it felt to me like his energy short-circuited our grid more than once. There was kind of like this, like a short circuit. Give you an example, and I mentioned this earlier about the Popol Vuh being ill-housed at the Newberry Library. This is a picture of him. This is the Popol Vuh, the only copy of the Popol Vuh in the world. And these are candles. See the colored candles? And his zoot on his head. This is called a zoot. And we went to view the Popol Vuh. It's been there since 1926, probably. I'm just making that up. But they're having their 125th anniversary at the Newberry Library. So they're taking all the gems of their collection and having a special exhibition. So we go, we walk into the building, he's playing flute beautifully, reverberating off the walls. We come to the ground, the main floor, the main lobby. He gets down and kisses the floor. And by this time, all the people in the library are like, wow, what's going on? This is a sacred moment for him to see his Bible, right? So anyway, we go up to see the exhibit, to see it. And it's in this case that's overshadowed by a Bible that's like this thick, probably weighs about 20 pounds, gold leaf trim on the edges. And it's in the shadow, like they had to have special lights in there because of the antiquity of the collection. But you could barely see it. And we're like, you don't want to say anything, but really. That was like, and you could just see him go. He was deflated. So he wanted to see it and touch it. You're not allowed to do that. So he took this reading room version, and we went up to the reading room, and he took that, and he, did the ceremony and made prayers. And then when we're leaving the library, he's got this big, beautiful jade vestment, like a necklace, with pieces of jade like this big around, it was heavy, And I've seen him wear it all the time. Whenever he's in ceremony, he wears it. We're walking out of the library, and it breaks. And the jade goes all over the floor. And all of us just, oh my God, what is this? And he mutters something like, well, los abuelos, like the ancestors aren't happy. But, he doesn't get ruffled. He's a man of peace. He's always at peace. And, he picks up the pieces, puts them in his vara, his sacred bundle. And he left one in the corner right, where the door jamb is. He left a piece there. And we have vowed to work with the Newberry Library to make sure that book is handled with a little bit more respect. But that's what I mean about short-circuiting. His wife, driving around, got stopped by the police 3 times. And they were just, he looks like a normal person, right? But it was the energy. He was like, not of this world. And it didn't cause any problems or anything like that. It was just like, these little short circuits that happen when you're not on this grid. You're on a different dimension. Did that help answer your question about Nacht?
State of consciousness, there are many different levels, and each level has probably a different rate
Frequency,
of frequencies.
right. And he's on a different frequency, for sure. To watch him walk in nature was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I mean, you talk about being one with nature. I'd never witnessed anything quite like this. I mean, he was in it and of it, and again, you could feel that. I mean, it was a visceral experience to be in that with him.